everyone, and welcome into another edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Happy Friday to you all. Hopefully you've enjoyed this week of shows, but we have a banger to conclude the week here, starting off by previewing our two NFL championship games, starting off in the NFC with the Eagles and Commanders, then switching it up to the AFC, talking about Chiefs Bills. Then I'll be looking at some quarterbacking situations in college football's hottest conferences, two of them, the SEC and the ACC. I think that these two conferences are returning the most talent at the quarterback position next year and could be primed for solid teams making solid CFP runs. And then finally, we conclude today's show with a Bundesliga preview. RB Leipzig taking on Bayer Leverkusen, the first team that Bayer Leverkusen lost to this year in the Bundesliga after their unbeaten run to the Meisterschaft this season. Can Bayer Leverkusen run Bayern close, put the pressure on them, or will RB Leipzig find their footing in that game? But before we get into any of that fun stuff, I do want to remind you all to like, follow, and subscribe to the show on the network if you haven't done so already and want to keep up to date with all of our content. Consider making yourselves available to, as always, the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on my screen and on YouTube. They're a great way, as always, to get your opinions, feedback, input out there for me to read them and react to them as well. You can do it through our website, gsmcpodcast.net, as well too. You can also leave any tips or donations, which are genuinely appreciated by all concerned here at the network, and just makes our shows that much better. But without further ado, let's jump right into our NFC Championship game preview. Eagles taking on their NFC East rival Commanders at home at Lincoln Financial Field. It should be a raucous environment, two of the NFC's best. But I think that this game has more storylines surrounding it than the Chiefs-Bills game, surprisingly. Because speaking about the Commanders is always incredible to behold, considering the trajectory of their season, right? They implemented an entirely new regime organizationally. They got rid of Dan Schneider. They brought in GM Adam Peters. They brought in head coach Dan Quinn. He brought in offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury. And a lot of pieces had to be fitted into this puzzle. So what do? With the second overall pick, they draft Jaden Daniels. He quickly becomes perhaps the best rookie quarterback of all time in the regular season, set records for completion percentage and rushing yards, and now finds himself on the doorstep of being the first ever rookie quarterback to star in a Super Bowl. And the only team in his path is a team in his division that he's all too familiar with in their two games this season, the Philadelphia Eagles. And one man matters more to this game than perhaps any other, and that is Saquon Barkley. Now more than ever, I feel like the Eagles are going to be needing Saquon in this game, because this is eerily similar to these teams' second meeting of the regular season when Jalen Hurts went down with an injury, because now Jalen Hurts might be playing through an injury, or he may not play entirely, concerning severity of this injury, and really waiting to hear what's going on with it. Because now that the Commanders are coming in with all this fire, beating the number one seed Detroit Lions, a 15-win team, I feel like the momentum is slowly going towards their side. But because of Saquon Barkley, you can never doubt this Philadelphia Eagles team, even with a hobbled quarterback. And Jalen Hurts has been here before. He's been in this position, getting this team to the Super Bowl a couple years ago. But ultimately, it's going to be a lot harder. But let's get into the details of this matchup, the impact certain players can be, and the big questions that both teams have to answer. Let's start with the Commanders, because the Commanders also have their fair share of injury worries, especially at the interior of their offensive line. Obviously, right guard Sam Cosmi last week went down with an injury, graded as one of the best interior offensive linemen this year by PFF, replaced by Trent Scott, who only logged 45 snaps at the position prior to that injury. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays into the Eagles' defensive game plan, what they failed to succeed with in their second meeting this season. That brings me to my first question that the Washington Commanders have to answer. Can Daniels continue to beat the blitz? Because the Eagles blitzed him at the second highest rate he had been blitzed all regular season. 35.6% of his dropbacks, they blitzed him, daring him to make the quote-unquote rookie mistake. But he, against that Eagles blitz, had 10 complete passes on 15 attempts for 173 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions, and had the third highest passer rating of anyone blitzed that highly, throwing at least 15 times in those situations. So he is prepared for whatever the Eagles throw at him, but now he's San Cosme. And I feel like the Eagles are going to want to win this game defensively, because that's where they have all the juice. Yes, Saquon can be the difference maker, and we'll talk about Washington defensively. But I do think that the aim for Philly is to gain better field position than Washington, so that Jalen Hurts is not going to be asked to do too much because of that injury and how hobbled he could be. So I feel like if the Eagles take the initiative, if the Eagles dominate the trenches and really figure out the interior of that Washington offensive line, it could be a much tougher day for Jaden Daniels than the last time out here. And then on the other side of things, looking at the Washington defense, their run defense was one of the worst in the entire NFL, and it's only gotten worse in the postseason. I believe they were the 4th worst in terms of the regular season, giving up 137.5 rush yards per game. Now they're giving up 150. And the way they let Jahmyr Gibbs run all over them should have Saquon chomping at the bit to get out this defense. And he's going to have to be the bell cow in this game because of what could be a very hobbled Jalen Hurts. So that's one of the questions I feel like the Commanders need an answer. Can the big boys up front, the Daron Paynes, the Jonathan Allens of the world, get going so that this secondary can also find confidence and rhythm in their game, which much like they did against Detroit? Because the way I see it, Jared Goff and Jalen Hurts are semi-similar. It's just that Jalen Hurts has the dual threat ability to escape situations that Jared Goff can't, and he's asked to do a little bit less than a guy like Jared Goff in this offense. Because of that dual threat ability, I put him just above Jared Goff when it comes to the NFC in terms of athleticism and the ways he can carry a team, but now he's hobbled. So by taking away a threat that Washington has already looked good against, that means that this entire defense's focus is concerned with stopping the run. Not just the guys up front, but the guys on the back end as well. And the way they do it is by forcing them into the 2nd and long, 3rd and long situations and forcing Jalen Hurts to win with his arm, which he might not be ready to do. So, like I say, Saquon will determine this game. The way he goes, the way Philly's offense will go, and if this Washington run D cannot keep up, then it spells danger for them. But then again, in a shootout, why wouldn't you favor the Washington Commanders, a team that put up 45 points on an albeit depleted Lions defense, but still a Lions defense that a lot of people weren't worried about coming into the postseason just because, well, they were going to play either the Bucs or Commanders, and even though they were high-powered offenses, their own offense could simply outscore them. So the fact that the Commanders put up 45 points against the number 1 seed, no matter how banged up they were defensively, really speaks volumes. But then again, this defense is different from the Lions defense. This is statistically perhaps the best defense in the NFL this season, and they've only gotten better. They've only kept the Eagles in these past 2 games. It could have been different had either the Packers or Rams offenses been a little bit more competent But ultimately, that's the reason why they are here. Saquon Barkley, an opponent defense built through the interior and strong enough in the secondary to really match up very well against this Washington team. But when looking at this Washington team and thinking about my prediction, I can't get past the fact that no matter what any team has thrown at Jaden Daniels, he has simply risen to the occasion. I don't know what the Eagles' defensive game plan is going to look like. Whether they go man-to-man, dare Jaden Daniels to make the rookie mistake, dare him to turn the ball over, which is something that both of these teams have been sterling in terms of not doing this postseason, then potentially the Eagles can win this game. But as the week has gone on, as I've heard about the Commanders' mentality, as I think about this team, think about how they've rebuilt to this point, how they've gotten to this point with a rookie quarterback, I have to say the Commanders, in my opinion, are the favorites in this one. And I feel like they're going to come out and say, hey, we're down a couple important guys. Our run defense is not the best. We might not slow down Saquon Barkley, but we know that our guy, JD5, is good enough to get us to the Super Bowl. So we're going to go out there, go mano-a-mano, toe-to-toe with you, and we'll see who's the better NFC East team. Because the Washington Commanders are definitely playing it like it. So without further ado, my pick for this game is Commanders by a touchdown, 38-31. I think it's going to be an electric game, and I think the Eagles will be buoyed by that home atmosphere. I think they'll be uplifted by Saquon for large portions of this game. He'll get them out of trouble, but I cannot doubt the young man wearing number 5 on the Washington Commanders anymore. And I do think he has the talent and the players and the coaching necessary to be the first rookie quarterback to start in a Super Bowl. But let me know what you guys think about this game. It's going to be a good one. But coming up next, we transition over to the AFC, talking about a big rivalry in the AFC, specifically in these championship games. It's going to be Chiefs-Bills at Arrowhead. What a mouth-watering affair that's going to be. We'll be right back to talk about it.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you all that throughout the duration of the show, whilst we are live streaming, if you want to contribute, interact a little bit more, get your opinions, feedback, or input about the show out there, you're very welcome to through the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. You can also do it through our website, gsmcpodcast.net. Tips and donations as well are greatly appreciated by all concerned here at the network if you so feel like it, but it just makes our shows that much better. We thank you in advance for whatever you do to promote them. But without further ado, let's get into a movie we have become all too familiar with over in the AFC. Chiefs-Bills at Arrowhead to decide the AFC Championship. We've seen these quarterbacks play before, one of the most legendary modern rivalries at the QB position. Mahomes, Allen. We know that Allen rules the roost in the regular season, but when the postseason comes around, Patrick Mahomes and his voodoo magic always come out on top. A sterling 3-0 record in the postseason against Josh Allen and his Bills. But this time, it could be very different, even though it's still Arrowhead, it's still Mahomes on the other sideline, and it's still Steve Spagnuolo, one of the best defensive minds when it comes to postseason in NFL history. But let's talk about the hypotheticals here. Let's talk about ways both of these teams can establish their identity on this game, including how Josh Allen can finally get over the hump and how the Chiefs' defense was the biggest X factor in this one as well. Let's talk about the Bills here, right? Because everyone thought that the Bills might take a bit of a step backwards considering all the production they lost from their offense last year. Gone were both Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis before the start of the season, and they went into the season trusting a third-year guy who never been a number one receiver in Khalil Shakir, a rookie in Keon Coleman, and Dalton Kincaid, one of the better tight ends in the league, but still very raw heading into his second year. And then in the backfield, have a guy in James Cook, who I think is one of the most underrated running backs in the league, but certainly not someone you would expect to truly carry the burden of Joe Brady's offensive mindset for this year's team. And then, of course, you bring back Josh Allen, but you also worry now that he had no true number one receiver, how turnovers would affect him. Well, he answered the question throughout the regular season in sterling fashion, and as a result, he might be the first-time MVP everyone thinks he might. He really limited the turnovers, but most importantly, he didn't go looking for the explosive plays. And now he's in the AFC Championship game against a team that used to live on explosive plays, but now are playing very similarly to how the Bills look. So, if you look at this game at face value, these teams match up very, very well. More interestingly so than previous iterations where it could have looked like the Bills, because of talent like Diggs and Davis, could have overcome the Chiefs, but couldn't because, well, it's Patrick Mahomes. But now, it seems like this is a more evenly matched game. Because as Josh Allen has ascended to the throne of perhaps the best QB, perhaps most valuable player in the NFL right now, Mahomes has kind of declined. This has been statistically his worst ever season, but we're in the postseason now. And that's where Patrick Mahomes' status as an elite QB arises. And so that's what makes this game so intriguing, so difficult to pick. But I do think that in terms of ways that both of these teams can win this game, the X factors, so to speak, in these games, the Chiefs' defense, and then ultimately how Allen can look in a more methodical approach against Steve Spagnuolo's defense. Because I feel like the Chiefs' defense is well equipped to stop the run. I love how they mix up guys in the interior, Karlaftis, Jones. I love how they do it. Jamari Connor ultimately being one of those guys who's solid in run support from the secondary. Mike Dana in the middle, I believe, still. But I do think that Josh Allen is going to be fine taking what this defense gives him. Because even if James Cook is bottled up, I really like how guys like Shakir especially occupy the middle of the field and really challenge defenses to tackle very well. And what I mean by that is he's a very nice yak receiver. He can sit in the middle of certain schemes, receive the ball, and then go upfield, unlike many other receivers at the number one spot. He's not necessarily going to burn you like a lot of these superstar elite receivers at the number one spots for their respective teams can, but he is very savvy. And he'll know, that the Chiefs are going to want to light up Josh Allen. They want to slow down Cook and ultimately force him to go deep. But with a receiver like Khalil Shakir, he's so unique at the number one spot that you also have to account for how he creates after the catch. And then on the Bills side of things, going to be a very similar situation as well, because Kelsey is really showing his age in certain areas of his game, but the reason why he's still effective is because he's able to exploit soft coverages, much like what the Bills employ, and create after the catch. So I feel like two huge X factors in this game, outside of, say, the Chiefs' defense and Josh Allen and his backfield, are both Shakir and Kelsey respectively, because they're unique players that test very blitz-heavy, zone-heavy teams and really make them have to play a little bit more disciplined and soundly than usual. So I hope that really helps you understand how this game is a little bit more different than others, where both of these guys were gunslinging the ball down the field. It was back and forth, much like the divisional round game, or was it the championship a couple years ago with the 13 seconds thing. But I do think that this time around, it's going to look a little bit more methodical, and it's going to be a little bit more low scoring than people think, which lead me to believe that special teams as well is going to play a huge role. It's going to be a cold day there at Arrowhead, so wind might not be in the kicker's favors. But I do think that both Butker and Bass are prepared for cold weather moments, prepared for last-second field goal attempts. So I do think that those guys are kind of the underrated X factors in this game, seeing as to how very little could already separate both of these teams. But now let's talk about the quarterbacks and how, depending on your view of the game, they've improved or declined. I don't necessarily feel like, let's start off with Mahomes, that Mahomes has really declined specifically because he's taken what the defense is giving him. I think he's declined because the mindset of this offense was starting to lean before the season's inception towards a more explosive attack, right? You drafted Worthy, Hollywood Brown comes over, you get DeAndre Hopkins mid-season, so you have all these receivers who are very tall, solid downfield threats to balance out what Kelsey can do. So I think the disappointment was that Mahomes really started to prove that he wasn't just going to be a downfield passer. And as a result, I think that this offense really didn't click a lot of ways people think it should have. But ultimately, I'm not necessarily too worried about Mahomes, especially in the postseason, just because of the fact that when he's in the postseason, it doesn't necessarily matter how poorly he plays. He knows that Spagnuolo, yet again, is going to scheme up something to put pressure on the opposing offense and really make this a lot closer than people think. Because in reality, a lot of people probably think that when the Chiefs look as down as they have, that they can get down on their day. That a talented offense on their day can overwhelm the Chiefs. And that's what the Bills did in their regular season meeting. And it's the only loss the Chiefs had where all of their starters played. But now, I just feel like this game is given another opportunity. Now that the Chiefs are in the postseason, they're in the mindset of winning. We want to get this three-peat. They're going to be in the zone, specifically Steve Spagnuolo. And I love what Joe Brady has done with this Bills offense, but it's going to be difficult to go up against this Chiefs defense and expect to get much going if you want to take a more methodical approach in this game. And I think a lot of people might be skeptical about that, but I do think that in this one, it's big plays that could decide it either way. It could be a deep pass or it could be a turnover. And so I think that because neither of these teams want to blink first, that's going to be tentative. We're going to feel each other out, much like, say, a European football match. I don't know why I said that, because we're not talking about that just yet, but you get my idea. But ultimately, I do think that in terms of picking the winner of this one, I gotta go with the Chiefs. It's Arrowhead, it's Mahomes, it's Reed, it's Spagnuolo. We've seen this movie before. And until Josh Allen can prove that he can go on the road, no matter how improved he's looked, no matter how Mahomes-like he's become in order to really help his team out, it's going to be a daunting task to try and employ that methodical approach against this Chiefs team. So I'm going to take the Chiefs in a close one, 24-20, because I do respect the fact that the Bills are going to want to make this as methodical as possible. They're going to want to elongate this game as long as possible. But in the end, I just think that the Chiefs are going to prove that they're more built for this moment at home than the Bills are on the road. So that's my score. But let me know what you think in the comments below, because coming up next, we transition over to college football, lingering with it for a little while longer, going on into next week as well. But talking about the best quarterback situations for 2025 in the SEC. A lot of interesting guys returning, a lot of interesting guys left, but ultimately still one of the premier conferences when it comes to quarterback talent. I'll be right back after this break to discuss it.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free.
Hello everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of today's show, we transition into the world of college football, talking about some of the best quarterback situations now that the 2024 college football season is over and we're transitioning into 2025 in one of the best conferences in terms of quarterbacking talent, the SEC. I know a lot of guys have left this conference, and a lot of teams might be questioning who might step up in their place, but all the teams on this list seemingly have their situations figured out, and they're looking pretty good. These are all teams outside of, say, one who are on the outside looking in for the CFP because of their quarterback play, because they're returning this talent. They definitely have strong outlooks for next year. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it and talk about 5 quarterback situations to look out for in the SEC next year. Starting off with one that I really, really, really love. Florida returning DJ Lagway, the number 8 recruit in the 2024 class. Obviously, Florida having a topsy-turvy season, with the best moments of Florida's season when DJ Lagway was at the helm. He averaged 16.7 yards per completion, really showing that dual threat ability, pulling off some upset victories. I don't necessarily remember the big victories. I believe they had a big one against Auburn at the end of the season. Obviously, people are going to wonder what could have happened had DJ Lagway played against Texas, and how fun that game could have been going up against Quinn Ewers. But I do believe that DJ Lagway is in a solid position to continue to improve this Florida squad after a much better than expected season, when a lot of people thought it was going to be a down year, just because a lot of people didn't know if DJ Lagway was ready to take the lead. But because of all the injuries to Graham Mertz, because of the indecision by Billy Napier, DJ Lagway found his way to the starting role, and when he was on the field fully healthy, he certainly looked like one of the most fun SEC quarterbacks to monitor throughout his illustrious career, hopefully at Florida, and gives them a lot of hope to be a sneaky CFP contender next year as well. So ultimately, really excited to see what DJ Lagway can do in year 2 leading this offense. But now let's go to a team that certainly had its quarterback issues, its offensive line issues, overall offensive issues last year, but landed perhaps the best transfer QB they possibly could have. Oklahoma landing John Maytier out of Washington State. Another transfer quarterback from Washington State looking to rejuvenate a program much like Cam Ward. He was the top QB according to ESPN in the transfer portal, so kudos to Oklahoma, even as a Texas fan, for getting him. He had 3,139 yards last year, 29 touchdowns, 826 rushing yards, and 15 touchdowns for Washington State. Another fascinating dual-threat quarterback from Washington State, like I said, much like Cam Ward, looking to really transform Oklahoma offensively. A lot of receivers are now starting to go to Oklahoma now, starting to sign for Oklahoma because of this decision. And I really think the fact that Ben Arbuckle traveling with him, the offensive coordinator from Washington State, will be a big help to this offense, because I do believe that Brent Venables is going to, at the end of the day, rely on his defense to really carry this team, and they are looking to have a pretty elite one next year. But they really did want a quarterback who could be a difference maker for this team because of the failures of Jackson Arnold and Michael Hawkins to lead this team last year. So scooping up a guy like John Maytier, the top QB in the portal, was huge for them, and I'm looking forward to the Red River rivalry showdown a little bit more this year, seeing how he matches up against Arch Manning, who we'll talk about a little bit later in this segment. But ultimately, being able to acquire a dual-threat quarterback in the SEC will prove vital for a team like Oklahoma, because that's where I feel the SEC is going. All of these young guys combining their dual threat abilities to create these sneaky contenders, or in the cases of teams like, say, Texas or Georgia, really revamp them to the point where they might continue to stack up CFP appearances. So I really think that it was very integral to the success of Florida next year that they go out and get a guy like John Maytier at the QB position. When I want to transition to another guy, much like DJ Lagway, going to be year 2 in 2025 in his respective offense, Lenoris Sellers of South Carolina. I really like this young man. He plays like a running back. He is 6'5", 250, and he really shows it on the field, on tape, whether or not he's passing the football or running it down your throat as a dual threat guy. 3,208 total yards, 25 total touchdowns, a sterling performance on the road against Clemson in the final game of the regular season to put their CFP hopes in doubt. Ultimately didn't help their own, and Clemson got ahead of them as ACC champions. But it just goes to show that next year, this team in South Carolina could be prepared to win 10 games rather than 9 and really put themselves in the reckoning for a CFP spot. And looking at how this team stacks up, I think that they can take down the Alabamas and Tennessees, the world of team that you would expect them to. And then looking at potentially an SEC championship game appearance, you might be able to make a game out of, say, the Texases or Georgias of the world, should they get there as well, because of the strength and physical abilities of a guy like Lenoris Sellers. They were never down and out in a game. He had a fantastic game against Texas A&M as well. And so I'm really looking forward to both Lagway and Lenoris Sellers having a say in how the SEC pans out. They have a lot of good games. Florida plays Texas. I believe South Carolina plays Alabama, maybe Georgia next year, and then Tennessee as well. But ultimately, Lenoris Sellers just makes this South Carolina Gamecock squad really sneaky yet again, and potentially a team that wins an extra game that puts them in the reckoning for a CFP spot. So overall, really, really looking forward to his year 2 in South Carolina. But let's talk about the man of the moment in the SEC down there at Texas. Going to lead the Longhorns next season, his first year as a starter. Of course, I'm talking about the ever-hyped Mr. Arch Manning, the number 5 recruit in 2023, waited his turn, bided his time behind Quinn Ewers. A lot of people saying leave the transfer portal, potentially go to Ole Miss, follow in the footsteps of your uncles. But no, he decided to stay and ultimately looked pretty good in some spot starts because of Ewers' injuries throughout the season. Completed 61% of his passes, 939 yards, had 9 total touchdowns, I believe, filling in for him. So we caught a glimpse of what this kid could do. Obviously, a lot more you could do with him than Ewers. Ewers a little bit more limited in terms of his deep ball accuracy, and as we saw in his spot starts, Arch Manning not afraid to throw the deep ball, so I like to see how he improves under Sark especially, and hopefully Sark has a little bit more diverse play calls for a player like Manning, unlike what he had with the Ewers, which really kind of stagnated the Texas offense at times. The fact that maybe Sark didn't trust Ewers in certain situations as much as he might trust Manning now. So ultimately, that question will have to be answered. But as a Texas Longhorns fan, I'm ready for the Arch Manning hype. I think that this kid can be really special this season. I think that he's not going to be swayed by all the media attention. He's not going to be swayed by the allure of the NFL draft coming up. But I do think that he is most importantly fully bought in to the Texas Longhorns identity. He wants to be the guy to lead them back. And I feel like before his Texas Longhorn career is done, he will have done so. I'm not necessarily certain that he's going to come back for 2 years. Maybe he does. But maybe since he's going to be perhaps the number one prospect in the 26 NFL draft, he's going to be a one-and-done guy. But in that one season, he's going to give a lot of Texas fans hope and optimism that he can get it done and officially proclaim themselves back. But until that happens, we're still asking questions about how excited Texas fans should be, including myself, about Arch Manning and his talent. Obviously, we talked about what's next for Texas. We talked about the production that is leaving them. We talked about how this offensive line especially is going to look next year. And yes, you have a lot of talent in your backfield, and you're bringing back some very talented, underrated receivers and guys like Moore, Wingo. You signed guys like Jamie French, Khalil Lockett, ESPN 300 guys who are really excited to play with Arch. But ultimately, you're going to have to think about all the losses and think about potentially how it might affect the flow of this offense and this defense as well, because it's going to be a team effort here. So as much as I'm excited about Manning, there are questions to be asked, but I do think that Texas is in a solid position still with Arch Manning at the helm for next year, what he could be capable of doing. But then last but not least, let's talk about an exciting young man, a guy who I'm glad is going to be sticking around in college football for one more year. True battle to stay with Vanderbilt, Diego Pavia. Interesting story that transpired throughout the season for Diego Pavia to return to Vanderbilt. A former New Mexico State guy came over, I believe, with Clark Lee. But throughout the season, he was dealing with eligibility issues. Obviously wanted to stay one more year at Vanderbilt. The courts wouldn't allow him, but then he sued and ultimately won his case. So he returns as Vanderbilt's leading man, and he's the heartbeat of this team, right? He is someone who I'm really excited is returning to SEC football. Really, really, really one of the jokers in the deck of the SEC season. Upset the odds against Alabama. Nearly did it against Texas as well. 2,293 total yards, 800 rushing yards, 28 total touchdowns. So another dual threat guy, a little bit older, a little bit more seasoned, but also someone who's always going to be a wild card to beat you. You're going to have to watch out for the Commodores yet again if you're an elite SEC team, because Diego Pavia is back with a vengeance, and he had to have a journey to get here. You had to have a journey to even say, I'm going to play for another year and have another shot at it. And so while Vanderbilt might not be elite enough just yet to say make a run of the SEC championship game, let alone the CFP, they're going to surprise a lot of people with who they're going to beat next year because of this young man in Diego Pavia, and that's why I'm thrilled to see him back in a Vanderbilt Commodores uniform. Let me know what you think about this segment. I'll just about do it. But coming in as we transition over to the ACC, another quarterback returning a lot, another conference rather, returning a lot of quarterback talent. We'll be right back to talk about them after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, and for our fourth segment of today's show, we transition from the SEC to the ACC in terms of looking at returning quarterback talent and which situations will be the best in that conference. The ACC, in my humble opinion, one of the most underrated conferences in the entire country when it comes to quarterback talent, and I really wanted to share this with you because all of these guys on this list can make a huge difference for their teams, whether they be transfers, whether they be returners, whether they have a chip on their shoulder, whether they're back with a vengeance. All of these guys have a point to prove, and they're really exciting talent. So without further ado, let's talk about these situations in the ACC, starting off with perhaps the best returning quarterback in the entire conference, in Cade Klubnik of Clemson. Obviously had a rough start to his Clemson career, replacing DJ Uiagalelei and his really weird start to his career. Hopefully DJ Uiagalelei finds his footing somewhere, maybe outside of the country, but I'm not sure what happened with him. But I digress, because we're talking about Cade Klubnik, someone who really matured in his second season as the starter, returns for his senior season as aptly as anyone under Dabo Swinney could. 3,639 yards though last year, 30 touchdowns, 16 more than the year prior. Third straight season under Garrett Riley, most importantly their offensive coordinator, and 11 games and multiple touchdowns. And I do think that the promise he showed in fighting against Texas, leading his team to the brink of potential upset, really showed the moxie this kid has, really showed the improvement and maturity and understanding between himself and Garrett Riley, really leading him as the OC. Most importantly, what I love about him is he's a senior quarterback. And it really goes to show that you don't necessarily have to be a one-and-done guy. You don't have to be someone like an Archer Manning who waits their turn, plays one season, and then leaves. You can be a guy like Cade Klubnik who is willing to improve. And that's something that I like about Dabo Swinney. Love him or hate him, he relies upon certain guys who are willing to learn under his tutelage. And he did a great job in hiring Garrett Riley, really rejuvenating a guy like Cade Klubnik, and I'm really intrigued to see how he improves. He could be, in my opinion, one of the top QBs taken in the 26th NFL draft, but ultimately I applaud him for returning because it takes a lot of strength, it takes a lot of guts to return to a team as a senior when you could have gone in this year's draft, could have been potentially one of the top 5 QBs taken, and really want to learn more, really want to improve, really wants to build on a very strong season for Clemson and for himself. And that's why I think he leads the way in terms of returning quarterback talent for the ACC in terms of how good this conference could look at the position. Now let's talk about an interesting returnee over at Georgia Tech, Mr. Haynes King. What a weird college career he has had. I don't know what that was. But ultimately, talking about Haynes King is an interesting topic because of, like I said, his many trials and tribulations as a college football quarterback. Started out his career at Texas A&M. Obviously had quote-unquote Alabama boost over there, where every random Texas A&M QB over the past 5 years in the Jimbo Fisher era plays well against Alabama. That was mainly how a lot of people may have heard of him over the years, but now at Georgia Tech has gone kind of under the radar for his dual threat ability in terms of leading the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets to kind of the mid-tier of the ACC. A lot of people did not think this Georgia Tech team would be good at all. but they upset the odds in Ireland against Florida State, even though Florida State turned out to be a pretty bad team. Nearly upset the Georgia this year in a classic game that went 8 overtimes and really proved the dual threat abilities of Haynes King, and that's what I love about him. I love me a dual threat QB in the mold of, say, like a Riley Leonard, who just goes at opposing defenses with aplomb, not afraid to risk his body. And I like the backup situation as well with Aaron Philo as well. Not necessarily as well built as Haynes King, but still a very nice backup dual threat quarterback. So ultimately, Georgia Tech could be a dark horse this year in the ACC because of Haynes King's return. It's not necessarily the best in terms of arm strength or accuracy, but he gets the job done, I'll say, about Mr. Haynes King. I feel like going into his 3rd season in the system, he is someone who I feel like really has a chance to prove that the start of his career will not be like the end of his career. He has truly proven he can redeem himself. The past 2 seasons, he's thrown for 41 touchdowns. So, as you can see, steady improvements for him. And this could be a breakout year where ultimately an NFL team might really like him because of what he's able to do this year and take a chance on him. And in a very deep field, that's all you really want if you're a quarterback like Haynes King, to be noticed for your abilities. And I think he has a great chance to do so in this very crowded ACC. So I do think that a lot of people might still underappreciate Georgia Tech this year just because of how top-heavy the ACC could be. But I'm not underrating Haynes King and what he can do and how he can improve, most importantly. That's why he sits here on this list. But let's talk now about the most interesting situation. Another transfer QB coming in from Miami after a lot of people thought he would declare for the draft. Could have been perhaps the number 1 QB taken in the draft, but after a pretty bad season, not necessarily the season you would expect out of him, transfers to Miami with a new start. Carson Beck. Now, he did forego the NFL draft after a lot of people potentially saw him as someone a lot of NFL teams would be interested in. And I think it was ultimately the right choice for him. I don't necessarily think he was pro-ready after a lot of people put the pressure on him to be the number 1 QB in this class. A lot of preseason hype surrounding him. But I do think that transferring to Miami is a good move for Carson Beck. Obviously, they're going to lose a lot of receiving talent, but they're also going to gain some as well. A lot of Georgia guys might follow him a little further south to reunite with him, and this could be an offense in the ACC predicated on Carson Beck's stability and his ability to spread the football around. That's what I really appreciate about a guy like Carson Beck. While he had his struggles this season, certainly tossed his fair share of interceptions, I do think that his ability in all the areas of the field to spread the football around, distribute the wealth, is not going to go unnoticed in Miami. He could improve his draft stock, like I said, in a very deep 2026 QB class to the point where he himself could be the number 1 QB yet again, where a lot of people are going to be saying, hey, Carson Beck forgo the draft this year, but this time around he's not going to make the same mistake. And now in this Miami system where he could look a little bit more comfortable, not necessarily be too overhyped, I feel like he could potentially be the number 1 QB on our big boards yet again. So that's why I think that Carson Beck's an interesting proposition for Miami. But then again, there are still worries, there are still caveats coming with him. He obviously had the elbow surgery after that injury in the SEC championship game, so that's something that you're going to have to monitor if you're Miami. And also, I feel like when players do this, it is going to mean that not only do they feel like they could be in a better, more advantageous position next year in the NFL draft positioning, they have to prove it. Because I feel like if Carson Beck, goes into this season, this is a hypothetical, and does not perform up to Miami's standards and looks worse than, say, Cam Ward, who a lot of people think is going to be the number one QB off the board in this year's draft, then they're going to doubt Carson Beck even more. They're going to be like, well, Cam Ward came in as a transfer and immediately rejuvenated this offense, rejuvenated this program. So why can't Carson Beck do the same? So he's really making a statement of intent, saying that I can be better than what I was this season in Georgia and really prove that I too, after transferring, can rejuvenate my college football career, make people think better of me, and have a better chance of being drafted. So I admire his situation, I admire this decision, but it's going to be a risk because he's going to have to prove it. But ultimately, Miami goes into the season with a lot less questions at the QB position than you would think. And then last but not least, SMU's Kevin Jennings. I like this because not only does Kevin Jennings return, but former 5-star recruit and the guy he usurped for the starting role, Preston Stone, returns as well. But I really think that Kevin Jennings is a guy who a lot of people are going to be hyped to see in year 2 leading this offense. His third-team all-league performance cannot go understated. 3,245 yards, 23 touchdowns, 354 rushing yards, and 5 scores. And I think that Kevin Jennings is someone like a dual threat guy in the SEC. And I like that flair in the ACC because it might be what's needed to carry you over the hump in the ACC championship game this year. I mean, this year obviously was a year ahead potentially for SMU with their team that's playing with house money. Literally, they have all the booster money they need, and this program could be good for many years, and Kevin Jennings could be the start of something big down there at Southern Methodist University. So I really like that he returns and really wants to be part of this SMU rebuild, or whatever you might call it, considering the fact that they're not really rebuilding. They're almost ready. So I really like that decision by him. But let me know what you think about the QB situation. The ACC is going to be a loaded, top-heavy conference. But coming up next, we transition across the pond, specifically to Germany. We talk about a Bundesliga showdown between RB Leipzig and Bayer Leverkusen, 2 teams in the top 5. Bayer Leverkusen looking to put pressure on Bayern Munich. RB Leipzig looking to stay alive in the race for a Champions League spot. We'll be right back to talk about it after this short break. Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And to conclude today's show and the week here at the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, we go across the pond to Germany, to the Bundesliga, with a nice, mouth-watering top 5 clash between 2 heavyweights in Germany. RB Leipzig taking on Bayer Leverkusen, and this should be a good one. Bayer Leverkusen, obviously, if you're not familiar with them, truly the kings of last year, going on an unbeaten run through the Bundesliga, winning their first ever Meisterschale. Came up a bit short in the Europa League. I like to say that as a Bayern Munich fan, that they weren't completely perfect. They were a little bit blemished, but ultimately, tremendous season under Xabi Alonso last year. This year, running Bayern Munich a little bit close here at the midway point, the Hinrunde, as they call it, in the Bundesliga, in terms of how far back they are. Should they win this weekend and Bayern Munich were to lose to Freiburg, which I don't necessarily think will happen, hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers after that poor performance against Feyenoord, they will be within 1 point, and they will continue their, I believe, 8-match unbeaten streak if they do so. But RB Leipzig, here's the story of them. Match day 1, way back in match day 1, I believe, they were the team to ultimately beat Bayer Leverkusen for the first time in an entire season before anyone else. They were the ones to end the streak in the Bundesliga at the very least. They ran out 3-2 winners, 2 goals for Lois Opanda, who could be a big X factor in this game for them. But ultimately proving that even though this is kind of a down year for them, a lot of people believing that Leipzig could be title challengers themselves, that they still could be in the reckoning to really duke it out for their top 4 spot. Obviously not doing well in the Champions League this year, but to get back into the Champions League should be their priority. As for Bayer Leverkusen, they kind of did have a tougher start to the year than a lot of people expected, but now are looking like the informed team in the Bundesliga, winning all 5 of their last games. Believe they're now on a 7-game undefeated run. Nevertheless, yes, I believe they lost in the Champions League, but in the Bundesliga at the very least, looking like true title challengers if Bayern were to slow down their pace. So this game proving to be big for both teams in terms of their ambitions this season. Let's discuss the trajectories of both of these teams, the impact a win or loss could have on both of them, and ultimately the key players in this one. Let's start off with the storylines of this game. Let's talk about RB Leipzig for a little bit, because a lot of people might be a little bit more familiar with Leverkusen, but RB Leipzig were a team coming into this year that had a lot of good news surrounding it. A guy like Xavi Simons deciding to stay rather than not necessarily see out his loan from PSG. Bayern Munich was interested in him. For him to stay was a really nice decision that went RB Leipzig's way. They added Benjamin Sesko from Salzburg, Lois Opanda as well, I believe, from Club Brugge, really building up their attack. Have a decent defense as well. Willy Orban, Lucharl Gertruda, and of course their vaunted goalie Peter Golaschi still remains there. But I think this season did not go as expected, because a lot of these guys initially either didn't coalesce with each other or ultimately had kind of dried up in terms of scoring goals, because a lot of them are capable of scoring goals. Sesko, Opanda notwithstanding, especially Simons bringing that creativity in the midfield. But their goals have really dried up this season, and they really haven't had any sort of cohesiveness in their attack for a prolonged period of time. They have been in a rough patch of form, especially in the Champions League, even though they got their first win there. It might not even matter as they go into the final week of league games in the Champions League next week. But ultimately, in the Bundesliga, they still have a chance. They have not been in fantastic form. They've lost 2 of their past 5, drawn 1, only won 2, like I said. But I feel like if on their day this attack is in rhythm and Xavi Simons is pulling the strings in the midfield as their creative engine, then they might be able to pull it off yet again against Bayer Leverkusen. But it's going to be a tough task, because obviously Leverkusen is an elite team. Let's talk about them. Maintaining a lot of their own roster over the year, maintaining their manager in Xabi Alonso, deciding to stay for at least 1 more year, but most importantly, the retention of Florian Wirtz standing out as well as a lot of different clubs. Bayern Munich, I believe, leading the pack, Real Madrid, Barcelona, wanting his signature over last summer, but deciding to stay, could leave at the end of this year, maybe in 2026. We talked about Bayern's plans with him, but for now, remaining the apple of the eye of Bayer Leverkusen fans. But as well as him, you still have guys like Frimpong, you still have guys like Alejandro Grimaldo, who really define this system as the wingbacks pushing up high, And then guys like Patrick Schick, who's stepping in very nicely for Victor Boniface. And when Victor Boniface is healthy, those two guys up top, even though Patrick Schick seems like he was over the hump in a good run of form these past couple of weeks in replacement of Victor Boniface, but Victor Boniface as well ultimately being more of a powerful striker, more of a target man as well. But I really think that a lot of these guys staying proves that Bayer Leverkusen want this run to linger a little bit longer. And in order to do so, they need to continue stockpiling wins. Bayern Munich have had rough patches, but they haven't really been losing that much within them. Yes, you could say more about their Champions League status and that department as well, but ultimately in the Bundesliga, they haven't really hit a run of form where they've ultimately slowed down their title push. So Bayer Leverkusen just needs to win to stay alive here, and they've been doing just that, and they just have to hope now that Bayern Munich slips up yet again to one of these teams in the running for them to have a chance. But ultimately, the reason why I think RB Leipzig can pull up the upset is because of the fact that a lot of the noise surrounding all of their players and where they could be going or who could be leaving, who could be coming in potentially, is slowly quieting down. Benjamin Sesko, I believe, said that he was not in contact with any other clubs. I know Arsenal and Liverpool, I believe, are heavily linked with him, not just in this window, but the summer window as well. But ultimately, a lot of people saying he's content to stay at the club. Obviously, the whole Xavi Simons saga is dying down, and Lois Opanda settled in very nicely. So ultimately, the fact that their three biggest players are now devoid of any noise from the outside, noise from the media concerning their status with the team, now they can just focus on playing the football that a lot of people expected them to. And so I don't necessarily think this is going to be a team that goes quietly against the juggernaut that is Bayer Leverkusen. I feel that RB Leipzig are set up for a solid finish to the season, and I feel like a lot of the players that had rumors surrounding them will perform better as well. And then obviously this back line is still very potent, even though they've shipped the most goals of the top five and scored the fewest. I think that once this back line gets going, once combined with the goals they can score, that gets going as well, and this team is going to be a very cohesive unit. And so I don't necessarily think that Bayer Leverkusen should take this game very lightly, because I think that RB Leipzig are going to be a talented team, unlike they've been throughout the season on the pitch Saturday, that potentially Bayer Leverkusen could not account for. And so that's why, in terms of predictions, I would take RB Leipzig here. But in terms of how this impacts Bayer Leverkusen win or lose, I don't necessarily think that Bayer Leverkusen should fret over a loss if they do end up losing here. Because the reason being, you're not necessarily looking for another Meisterschale if you're Bayer Leverkusen. I feel like you're looking for one more season of stability before it gets chaotic. And I feel like maintaining this pace is slowly going to kill you towards the end of the season. So if Bayer Leverkusen starts to hit a rough patch of form, I wouldn't be too worried if you're a Leverkusen fan, because it settles the storm that's coming up in the summer when a lot of guys could be leaving after this year. So if Bayer Leverkusen loses this, it's no sweat off their back. I feel like potentially they might need a loss, funnily enough, to relax them from thinking about the future. Because we all think of them as this juggernaut, but at the end of the day, this is a mortal football squad. This is a squad that, yes, has a lot of talent, maybe even more talent than Bayern Munich, if you really want to dig that deep. But ultimately, the reason why I think that Leverkusen wouldn't necessarily be completely distraught or frustrated with a loss is because they need to learn to be mortal again. Because chances are this success is not going to be sustained for years to come. Bayern's going to get better. Leipzig's and Frankfurt's of the world are going to get better. Potentially Borussia Dortmund will get better over the next couple of seasons once they find their new manager. But right now, Bayer Leverkusen are going too fast to slow down. They might need to slow down to realize what's coming. And so that's why I feel like, win or lose, Bayer Leverkusen should be content. Because even though this is an important game for both teams, and Bayer Leverkusen wants to run Bayern close here, and Leipzig wants to compete for top 4, RB Leipzig is the team going to be a little bit more motivated, just because of the fact they're more so fighting for their lives, whereas Bayer Leverkusen are fighting to prolong this moment. So that's what makes the difference for me in this game. So let me know what you think about this game in the comments. If you are a Bundesliga fan, RB Leipzig or Bayer Leverkusen fan, because that will just about do it for today's show. This has been the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next week, as always, at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Like, follow, and subscribe. Continue making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. But other than that, I'm out for today. See you all Monday.